Everybody's on now. But I still don't see a Laura T. I see a Lori, but
You see us?
We should be there because I said we would be. Let's see. But
John and Ginny's here.
oh, I guess we are here. Yep, there we are.
I'll put you
Laura's
on.
on.
So, speak. Can you hear me if I want to chime in? Well,
Can you all hear Laura when she's talking?
if I'm
Far
talking,
away.
can you hear me?
You sound far away.
Okay, sound far away. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we're gonna have her switch out and we'll switch out partway through so you guys can hear her a little better.
Just switch seats.
Yep.
Okay.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our November general meeting. We're going to start in just a couple of minutes. Just going to finish the YouTube live. All right. Okay. So hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Rovina Nimbalkar, and I'm the Executive Director at NAMI Santa Clara County. I'm going to start with some updates at NAMI Santa Clara County before we start with the presentations. The NAMI Walks was held on October 10th, which was also the World Mental Health Day and a Day of Hope as celebrated at NAMI. And NAMI Walks Your Way at Silicon Valley. NAMI Walk is the biggest fundraiser at NAMI Santa Clara County, and together we raised over $214,000. Thank you so much for your support and advocacy. Our goal for the fundraiser is $270,000, and we are keeping our fundraiser open until December 10th so that we're able to meet our goal and continue to provide the services that the community deserves. We also just launched this past week our first online silent auction. We have some amazing items from the Warriors and the 49ers, some paintings. It's right in time of the holidays for you to purchase gifts for your loved ones. The auction is a part of the NAMI Walks. And if you want more information, you can log into www.namiwalks.com/Silicon Valley. Now with some program updates, all our programs have been virtual since shelter in place. Our warm line is up and running from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday through Friday. And we do have some after hours family support on weekends and evenings. Support groups are all listed on our website and are offered over Zoom. The family to family, the next class is going to be in January, and so is the peer-to-peer provider education and faith net training. All of them are going to be in January now. If you need more details, you can contact our warm line. The community peer program continues to match via hospitals and self-referrals. I do want to let you all know that today we are live streaming this meeting over YouTube. So if you do not want to be seen, you can just not display your video. And I also request everyone to mute your videos, your Zoom, so that you can hear the presenters clearly. Before we start the presentations from our presenters, I would like to invite Curtis Ohashi. He's the Chief Operating Officer at Santa Clara Valley Medical Center. And Curtis is going to give us a very quick update about the construction that's being done at the Valley Med Center. Over to you, Curtis.
Thank you, Rowena. My name is Curtis Ohashi. Thank you for having me here. As many of you know, we are building a new psychiatric hospital, and I'm here to provide a very brief presentation on where we're at with that project. So if you bear with me, I'm going to try to share my screen. Somebody let me know if you could see that.
Yes.
Okay, so what I'm going to show you is the blueprints first, and then it's interspersed with some 3D renderings of what the interior design looks like so far. But I want to start with the site location. So it's not clearly marked here, but on this section here where my pointer is, this is where the VMC emergency department is. So it sits right across the street from the emergency department. And if you're familiar with the VMC campus, the RSC building sits right on the bottom part of the slide deck. So this is actually the footprint of the 2-story parking structure that sits right next to the ED, right across the street from the ED. Up here is the 3-story parking structure, which will remain there when the building is constructed. So just for orientation purposes, the front of the building is actually down here where my pointer is. All of the service lines and service units are color coded, so you can easily see where the services are located. And this building hosts a number of different services, including the inpatient service. I'm going to go over those relatively quickly. So starting here at the front entrance, this is what we call the public entryway. In the middle here, in sort of the pink fuchsia color, is the pharmacy. This is the pharmacy that's actually located on Enborg Lane. It will be relocated in the building. If you travel down to this part of the corridor, this will be mental health urgent care, and we'll see a close-up of that in a second. The green area represents the administrative offices that will support the building. The purple areas where the mobile crisis team will be housed. The back area, or the back of the building, which will be completely private. So even though this represents a 3-story parking garage, there will be a opaque screen that covers from the bottom floor all the way to the top. And on both sides, there will be privacy gates, and this is really the first responders entrance. So if you're familiar with EPS, where the first responder entrance is for ambulances and law enforcement, we made it much more secure and much more private. So they will actually enter here. There's an entryway for EPS in here. This red area represents adult EPS. And then this sort of, I don't know what color that is, kind of light purplish off color down in the lower left corner. That will represent minor EPS, which we currently don't provide in-house. That's currently being provided by an outside contractor. The middle area here is what they call the command center or the nurses station, and that's essentially, just in a summary, what's on the first floor. The green areas are outdoor courtyard spaces, which we only have on our inpatient unit, but you can see that we will have one here, which will be primarily for staff. This one will be for the adult EPS patients, and the bottom courtyard will be for the minor EPS patients. So let's see if I can advance my slide. Okay. This is a blow up of the minor urgent care area. So as you may or may not know, right now we have an urgent care area for adults, and we'll be adding one for minors. So if you look at the orange line from the front of the building, the egress into the adult urgent care area will be here. The purple line represents the egress into the minor urgent care area. And these are the actual 3D renderings of what it'll look like. So you can see there's 2 separate entrances. All of the design elements for the minor areas, we try to make age appropriate and welcoming and inviting. So you can see that this area, which is also a wayfinding tool, is much more colorful for the pediatric patients. This is the lobby area of the minor wait space. And you can see we try to add a lot more color, wood tones, which indicate warmth and welcoming environment, and a lot of colors displayed throughout. This is a minor urgent care treatment space. This is the blueprint of it here. This is what a interview room would look like. This is some of the color palettes, and the actual outside of the rooms will look like what's located in the bottom right corner. This is the minor EPS EPS minor area. With the inpatient and EPS areas, we have separate entrances for minors and adults. We have separate waiting spaces and separate treatment spaces. This is a blow up of what it looks like down here. And the most exciting part is the actual 3D rendering. So this is a 3D rendering of what the minor EPS dormitory space will look like. So this is their kind of waiting area here, which we currently don't have. And you can see they've added graphics and sort of age-appropriate colors and design scheme. This is a 3D rendering of the minor EPS day room. Again, one of the themes that they try to carry through with the design, that it's age-appropriate, that it's safe, that it's welcoming, and that it connotes a healing type of environment. Okay, going up to the, I'm kind of skipping the second floor, which is the adult area, and kind of highlighting the new service areas. So this is actually the third floor. This represents where the minors will be treated. On the left side of the floor plan is the adolescent inpatient unit. The brown area is the nurses station. The green area are the outdoor courtyards. The pine green are administrative office spaces. This is actually a view courtyard right in the middle that will go straight up 2 stories. And on the right side of the screen is where the child inpatient unit is. These are the actual rooms. The day rooms will be located in sort of the shared area here. This is the nurses station, and this is the courtyard area. This is a rendering of what the nurses station on the adolescent and child inpatient unit will look like. And so you can see we use a lot of colors, a lot of sort of cleverly designed seating and waiting space, and try to just convey an open, warm, welcoming tone throughout, especially the minor treatment space. This is a sample of a 3D rendering of what the day room would look like. It's an open concept day room with age-appropriate furniture, design, and so forth. This is a example of an inpatient adolescent room. And so we try to make it simple, safe, but also warm and inviting. These actually have Venetian blinds that are contained within 2 panes of glass, that the patients would be able to control their light with a knob down here. And this little item here is actually a reading light. And this is an example of a child inpatient room. And so if you're not familiar with the licensing regulations, typically the ages for the child unit run from ages 5 to about 12, and the adolescent unit runs between 13 and about 17 years of age. And I kept my presentation short. What we're looking for is, we're looking to complete this project in November of 2023. It will contain 77 inpatient beds. Most of the beds are singles, but we do have a number of semi-private rooms as well for flexibility. And because the design happened during the COVID pandemic, we took a lot of that into consideration in designing the building. So as an example, our current inpatient unit and EPS don't have a lot of opportunity for quarantining or social distancing. Here we built negative pressure rooms, and isolation rooms that would allow us to be much more flexible during a pandemic such as this. So let me go ahead and close this out. That's my presentation, but basically what we're looking at is we're closing up the design phase now. It should be done by next Friday. The OSHPD review, which is the hospital construction arm in California, will take most of next year. And then construction will happen in most of the year 2022, again, with a planned opening date of November of 2023. And so I know you, Rovina, gave me 10 minutes and I try to keep it under that queue, and I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone may have.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Curtis. This was really helpful. And if you do have any questions, you can type them in the chat box and I can pass it on to Curtis. I can send you by email if that's okay.
Okay. Well,
Thank
thank you for having me, and go ahead and
Thank
do
you.
my co-host before I.
Yeah, I already did that.
Okay.
I took it up. Yeah. Thank you so much, Curtis. This was very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
All right. I'm now going to have Beverly Lozoff come in to introduce our speakers for tonight.
Okay, hi everybody. So I did want to make one announcement before I went into tonight's meeting agenda. We do not have a general meeting in December. We've been doing this for years, that there's a break in December, and then our next general meeting will be on January 12th, 2021. And there will be information about the general meeting on that date. So about tonight, tonight's topic is the impact of vicarious trauma on family support systems. Both of tonight's speakers are with El Camino Hospital's Scrivener Center for Mental Health and Addiction Services. Brianne Baker, she does like to go by Bree, is manager of adult outpatient mental health and addiction services. And Laura Tannenwald is senior program therapist of addiction services. As we all know, the pandemic has exposed our community to varying experiences of trauma, isolation, loneliness, and a lack of connection. Not only is it important to understand how others' trauma and experiences impact us personally, but it is important to understand how we can care for ourselves in order to help care for others. Our speakers will go into a lot of detail about vicarious trauma and what things we can do about it. But before I welcome our speakers, I just would like to tell you a little bit more about them. Brianne Baker is a licensed marriage and family therapist. She has a BA from Claremont McKenna College in psychology and an MA in counseling psychology from the University of San Francisco. For 19 years, she has served the community and provided mental health services in many arenas. Her areas of specialty include trauma-informed care treatment, family therapy, group treatment, community-based therapy, couples therapy, group therapy, and individual therapy with children and adults. Laura Tannenwald is also a licensed marriage and family therapist. She holds a Bachelor of Arts degree from UC Santa Barbara in psychology and sociology, and an MA in marriage and family therapy from the University of San Diego. As a licensed therapist, Laura has worked in a variety of settings, including private practice, social services, adult day treatment, and hospital-based care. As a senior program therapist, she works in both the dual diagnosis and chemical dependency programs at El Camino. She has specialty training in dialectical behavior therapy, group therapy, and chemical dependency treatment. And with that, I want us to welcome our two speakers, and they will share their knowledge with us.
Hi, everyone. So, Ravina, is there a way you can give me the opportunity to share my screen?
I made you the co-host.
Great,
Did you get the invite?
I did.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, everyone, I'm so excited to be able to talk about this topic because I feel like it's really impactful on the times that we are going through right now. I feel like life events have always happened, but there seems to be this added stress that has come about with the pandemic and COVID-19. So it seems like a good topic to have a conversation about. So she gave a little history of me. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I support our adult services primarily here at El Camino Hospital. And I want to give a little background. I became interested in vicarious trauma because I worked in our community for a really, really long time doing home-based services, actually, for the first part of my career. And I found that there was this thing that would happen when I was in people's homes and when I was talking to families that often a lot of the focus goes on the people that we're caring for, and sometimes we don't notice how much we're being impacted by that. And both as family members and as providers, when we're hearing people's stories and we're absorbing that information, sometimes we don't quite know where to put it, and we also don't realize that over time it can start to impact us significantly. So I got really interested in this topic and started doing a lot of research, and I found quite a lot of information. And then also wanted to understand how, it supported me in being better at what I do and also as a family member myself. So I hope you guys find this helpful. I'm open to, I really encourage people to please use the chat function. There are some interactive pieces, so I want to keep everyone engaged. I'm going to be doing the first portion of the training, and then I'm going to be swapping out with Laura, who will be doing the end part of the training. So hang in there with us as we kind of navigate this new world of Zoom. So I always like to start with this quote because it really impacted me several years ago when I saw it. And it says, "The expectation that we can be immersed in suffering and loss daily and not be touched by it is as unrealistic as expecting to be able to walk through water without getting wet." And I felt that was so true. And even now, I feel like it's more a part of our lives. I was thinking back when I first started this work, and we didn't have like cell phones. I had like a pager, and I'd have to like answer my pager and run to the payphone and make calls. And now we're in such an age where media is a huge part of our life. We see sometimes tragedy every day just pop up on our news feed, on our Facebook, or that we see on the newspaper or in the community. There's just so much more access to this kind of information. And I think with the COVID pandemic as well, it's been impactful on us because we are seeing that lives are being lost in this process. And so add that on top of the fact that we might be a family member supporting someone who has mental health issues, and we're walking through that journey with them as well. And we just can't say it doesn't impact us. Like I just don't know how we can not, acknowledge that that's happening for us. So I just think it's really important to think about, we don't just walk away without anything at the end of the day. So there have been for many, many years some different types of trauma. And there are different words that have been used. And I know some people have heard some of these, like vicarious trauma, vicarious traumatization, secondary traumatic stress, compassion fatigue, and burnout. So those are the ones I could come up with off the top of my head. I feel like a lot of people have heard compassion fatigue or burnout. I think vicarious trauma, even though it's a word that's been around for a little bit, we've talked about it, but I wanted to talk about it so we could understand the difference of these different terminologies and understand that they actually do mean different things. So the first one is secondary traumatic stress. And it's the natural consequent behaviors and emotions resulting from knowing about a traumatizing event, experienced by another. And it's the stress resulting from helping or wanting to help a traumatized or suffering person. So we are impacted by the people that we support, whether we're a family member or a support person in the community. And it's important to know that that's a piece of that. And that's what secondary traumatic stress is. And I'll talk a little more about that later and how stress impacts our experiences. Another one I've heard a lot is compassion fatigue, and it's the combination of physical, emotional, and spiritual depletion associated with caring for patients or people we support in significant emotional pain and physical distress. What I loved about the work that's been done on the idea of compassion fatigue is it's actually been studied twice. So if you look, there was Figley who studied it in 1995, and the same results came out again in 2009. So this idea that we often can feel depleted, that word depleted sometimes when we're caring for someone else. And I think of compassion fatigue, I don't know if you guys have ever heard this thing, but I've told families a lot, like, it's really important sometimes that you put your oxygen mask on first, and then you put the person you're supporting on next. And that's not because that person isn't important or that's not an important person in your life that you need to support, but you need to put that mask on yourself, because otherwise it's hard to be present because you're fatigued. You're not getting enough oxygen, essentially. So I always found that really matched up with my understanding. And then I think everyone's heard about burnout. I feel like that's a big word that people use all the time, but I feel like it encompasses a lot. And there's not a lot of information on like what like burnout means, right? And what that impact is. But I think we've all felt that, just like I'm so tired and I don't know how else I can support and engage. So those are the pieces around those definitions. So the last one that we're going to talk about, which is what we're going to focus on mostly here, is vicarious trauma. And so this is the definition. Vicarious trauma is referred to as negative changes in a provider's view of self, others, and the world, resulting from repeated empathic engagement with family members, trauma-related thoughts, memories, and emotions. And so when we talk about providers, I think a lot of people go to doctors or EMS workers or clinicians, but I think that families are providers as well. And they're the primary providers, because I might see someone for an hour, but then that person might go home for 23 hours and be with the family. And so there is so much engagement with family members. And with the pandemic, I feel like there's been even though it's a different type of engagement where we're maybe not in the same room with someone, there's a lot of engagement happening on Zoom and FaceTime, and there's a lot of stress. So it's not necessarily like you're always having conversations where there's happy things going on, but there's also stressful conversations happening. And I think that's really important to acknowledge that's happening. Sorry, I'm admitting someone. So let's see. Sorry, my stuff is popping up. Uh-oh. Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about traumatic stress versus vicarious trauma. So traumatic stress is often about kind of having big responses to events that are happening or in your family engagement. Sometimes, and I felt this in my own family, where sometimes I'm like really emotional about something that's going on, or there's like an absence of emotion for me, like I'm just not feeling anything at all in the moment. There's fearful, jumpy, exaggerated startle response or flashbacks. So we can actually absorb that from other people. So on the vicarious trauma, what's a little different with that is that it's overly involved with a family member or someone else that you're trying to support in the community. There can be a hypervigilance or feel for our own safety. And sometimes we can have intrusive thoughts, images, or nightmares from other people's stories. So it's really important to be aware that when we're supporting the people that we love, supporting a friend, or you're someone in the community who's a provider, that we can actually take on, because we're empathetic and we're human, we can take on the feelings of other people and their experiences, sometimes just by hearing them. So what makes an event traumatic? I always think it's important to talk about this, because there are so many events that in our life, and I think right now for me, COVID feels traumatic. Having a pandemic in our community feels traumatic. It involves a threat, real or perceived, to one's physical or emotional well-being. It can be overwhelming. It results in intense feelings of fear and lack of control. It can leave us feeling helpless, and it can change the way a person understands the world, themselves, and others. And I felt like when I read this felt really impactful on the world that we're living in right now and the world we're experiencing. So I think it's important to understand that it's not just because you experience a specific event. So a lot of times when we talk about trauma, people talk a lot, I hear a lot about military, like veterans who've been in a war and something's exploded and then that's the trauma. But trauma exists in a lot of different areas in our life, and we will have things that leave us feeling helpless, you know, and that can then be a traumatic event for us. So it's important to be aware of the impact we're feeling from the world around us. So this is just some data. I just like to share it. So for those of us who are family members or people in the community who are providing support, this is just some data points from the last couple of years, but 50% of people who are supporting someone who's had a life event experience traumatic stress symptoms in the severe range, and 50% experience high to very high levels of compassion fatigue. That was some of the pieces I was talking about earlier, the difference between traumatic stress and compassion fatigue. I feel like there's quite a bit of compassion fatigue happening because of COVID and us seeing other people suffering in our community. So it's important we're aware that we're also experiencing that, even if maybe it hasn't hit us on a personal level. There's 34% met PTSD diagnostic criteria from secondary exposure to trauma. So I think that's really important. Oftentimes we think that people who are diagnosed with PTSD, it's because they've experienced a specific traumatic event, but we can actually have some of the same feelings and emotions that come. And I know it's a label, and so I like to talk about it because I think it's out there and I think it's important to understand, but we can also experience things that are difficult for us. And then the last one is 30% experience clinical levels of emotional distress associated with compassion fatigue. So it's important to know that when you're supporting others, whether you're a family member or someone in the community, that it's a real thing, that we can get tired and it impacts us. Okay, so I'm going to stop really quick. I want to take a look at the chat if I can. Ravina, can you share if there are any specific questions at this point for me? Because I can't see the chat right now.
Yeah, there's just one comment right now.
Mm-hmm.
It says, please understand that some of us here are members of NAMI or the mentally ill ourselves. We're trying to learn more about this disease, or we are people who are trying to help others, but we are not medical people. Thank you.
Yeah. Is there any, thank you for that input. It is hard. Sometimes we have to balance out some of the labeling with also the experience we're having kind of on the human side. So hopefully I'll move a little bit more into that, but I did want to give you guys some of the data and the pieces of that. If you guys have any specific questions about something I'm saying or it doesn't make sense, please ask me. I do have to say that in our field, we tend to acronym a lot. And so just please feel free to ask me. Is there any other questions, Ravina?
Yeah, so we received some questions when participants registered. Do you want me to go over those questions right now, or would you want me to do that at the end of the presentation?
I think why don't we go over them now, and then I'll get into an activity.
Okay.
I'll stop again later as well.
Okay, so I sent you some, and then I have more that came in much later.
Okay. Why don't you give me at least 2 questions right now?
Okay, great. So you said 2 questions right now?
Yeah, let's do 2 questions right now.
Okay. So are people who experience vicarious trauma compassionate people, or are they perfectionists and being unrealistic in their responses, thinking they can resolve all the world's problem?
Yes, I think that's such a great question. I call it the fix-it mentality, right? I actually think everyone can experience vicarious trauma, and I think that as humans, we're empathetic, and I think sometimes different people's stories or experiences can impact us in different ways. So, no, I don't think it's about being perfectionistic. I think it's about empathy, and I think it's about that we have empathy for others, and at times we might be more vulnerable because of different things happening in our lives to experiencing vicarious trauma. But I don't think it's a perfectionistic quality. I think that's a good question. But And I do think we have, I mean, I definitely went into this field going, I'm going to, you know, when I was in my 20s, like, I want to fix the world. I want to help all these people. I want to do these great things. And the reality that I found in my journey going through this process was it wasn't about me fixing anyone else. It was about me walking on the journey with them and understanding them and using my empathy and that part of myself to understand them. And with that, we have to be mindful about how that impacts us. So it's a really good question.
That's good.
Thank you for that.
Thanks. The next one is, now with the weather turning bad, zero housing, what is the best way to engage with a dual diagnosis homeless population and the most effective way to build quick rapport, trust? Thank you for your service.
Oh my gosh, that's such a good, good question. So with the, I mean, it's such a challenge, right, with COVID when we're talking about engaging with people and how do we support them. And definitely with the weather getting colder, it's quite difficult. One of the things I found is any way we can offer warm places for the homeless community to go is really helpful. And I know it's a little off topic of the vicarious trauma piece, but I think it's important for us to identify the places where we can support them and identifying where they can go that will be safe. And I think the second, Ravina, can you speak to the second? Oh, is the engagement with the population.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I've worked with the homeless population a good portion of my career, and I think sometimes for me, what has really worked, and I know this sounds really simple, but sometimes I just sit down and listen to their story.
Yeah.
And I think just taking the time to listen to someone's journey or story is a really powerful way to engage. And I've always done it with genuine intention of wanting to understand someone a little bit better, and that's how I present it. Not that I want to fix it or do something different with them, but just to understand. And so that has been really helpful for me with that engagement process with that population.
Thank you. Thank you so much for answering that.
Yeah.
I do have more questions, but if you want to continue with the presentation and then we can come back to these.
Yeah, I like to take a little break sometimes with all the data. So we're actually going to move into an activity. So I'm going to ask you guys, if you can, if you would all take out a paper and pen. If you just want to do it in your head, it's fine. But I want you to take the time and look, if you're someone who's a family member or a friend that you're supporting, I want you to take the time. And I want you to think about how often in a week or a month that you adjust your daily life to support them or have listened to a challenge that they're going through in the day. You could also do this how many times a month. It just depends on how much contact you might have with that support person or with that family member or friend that you're supporting. And I want you to think about all the different people in your life, maybe not just a person that's a family member who suffers from mental health, but maybe a friend or all the people in your world. And think about how many times you might hear something that's going on in their life that might be negative, and just write it down for me. And if you guys could share in the chat when you're done, give me the number of times.
And Bree, one thing that comes to mind is the question we're asking is about in your week, and I'm thinking now with COVID and families, more people living together because of shelter in place, it's probably per day and possibly per hour, where schedules and things have been disrupted or changed.
Could you please repeat the question? Because I was typing at the time.
Oh, the question, what I'm asking you guys to do?
Yes.
Oh yeah, absolutely. If you could get a paper and pen and write down a time, how many times in a week or in a month that you've supported a family member or friend, or just listen to their story about what's going on in their life for that week or that day or that month. So just write how many times you've been that person. And then when you're done, if you could send in the chat, if you could send what the number was. I got one that said daily, but that's a good point. This is great. Thank you, everyone. Okay. Oh, thank you so much, everyone, for participating. So I'm just going to take a couple of them, and I'm doing this because I want you guys to understand how much we're absorbing as a community too with people. So someone said 5 to 10 times a day. Now, if you take 5 times a day and you've had a conversation with someone about what's going on in their world, and you times that by 7 days a week, and then you times that by 52 weeks. I'm doing math the old-fashioned way, just to let you guys all know. 1,820 times you have talked to someone in a year about something that's impactful to them on an emotional level. And I then think you broaden that out from just your family member to maybe the friends you have or the people that seek you out in your world. I've heard up to 50,000 times in a year. That's a lot of information to absorb, and that's a lot of time that we're absorbing and hearing other people's journeys. I see some other ones just where there's multiple, where people have friends, sometimes 3 times a week, and you think about the input of all those different people in your world. Thank you so much. I appreciate for everyone sharing. Yeah, there's a lot of you, I think, who are supporting people daily who may be struggling with mental health. So thank you for sharing that. And then I also want to bring back to the pandemic, because I feel like on top of all of that, which is kind of the daily stuff when we're supporting someone who might have a mental illness or a friend who's having a rough day, that we also have COVID kind of sitting on us all the time. And I think it's important to be aware of that. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit, this always happens. Sorry. So I want to talk a little bit about the stress curve, because I think it's important for us to understand how stress impacts us. And even though I think I'll speak for myself, I feel really good that I get to be there for the people that are a part of my world. I also try to be super aware of how it impacts me as well, so I can be as present as I can all the time. So when we talk about stress response, and I love this thing, but it's really hard to read. So we have these different areas of where we should be living. And the reality is we should be living kind of in the yellow, which we call optimum stress. So sometimes if we don't have enough stress, that's not necessarily great, because we tend to be a little not as productive in our world. But if we have too much stress, and you look at the other side of the curve, it can create anxiety, worry. We can have different body responses, sweating, feeling like we don't have enough oxygen, muscle tension. I get this wonderful thing on the right side of my neck that gets really tight. I think everyone has different ways our body shows stress. And as an integral part of, we're a living organism, so our body is going to show stress in different ways, and it's set up to do that. And it's kind of like our alarm bell that maybe things aren't going too well. What's interesting is it can be really hard to stay in this there's this little tiny yellow area, which means we want enough kind of stress or things going on in our world that will help us be kind of the most productive and perform well. But then there's this very small tipping point where we go into exhaustion, and then the anxiety and panic and anger. And that's what leads us to too much stress and burnout, and then we just go on overload, and then we're not able to do much at that point anyways. And this kind of is just something to be really aware of. This is how this stress curve works. Because sometimes we think, if we don't have any stress, we'll be okay. And the reality is that isn't always the case. We want to have a little bit of stuff going on. We as humans like to have a little bit of excitement in our lives. It could be getting on a roller coaster. So there's different ways that we can have that in our world, but we want it to be in a healthy way. Sometimes it's kind of stressful for me to go to the gym, but I know it'll be really good for me. So it's kind of this process of figuring out how to balance out our world. So I want to talk about the examples of vicarious trauma from a personal level. And these are all the different areas that we can be impacted: physically, emotionally, behaviorally, spiritually, cognitively, and relationally. And then here are the different components. And this is from Figley, who I really like. But physical, we talked a little bit about that. Our body will kind of respond when we are starting to maybe absorb too much from the world around us, from our families, when we're taking it on physically. And it can be rapid pulse breathing. Impaired immune system, people tend to get a lot sicker, which is a little scary right now when we're under high level of stress and we have this COVID and the flu season and all of that's emerging right now. Emotional, some of the things you might feel if you're experiencing this vicarious trauma component is fear, anger, depletion, hypersensitivity, sadness, helplessness, emotional distress. Behaviorally, you might be irritable. We might have sleep or appetite changes, either sleeping too much, eating too little, sleeping too little. We might start to isolate from family because we're having maybe a lot of impact. It can be a loss of purpose or a loss of meaning spiritually. Sometimes we feel a little disillusioned with the world, which I think is coming up for a lot of people right now. I've heard a lot of that, those conversations, questioning our prior religious beliefs or pervasive hopelessness, which can be really hard to break out of. For cognitive, sometimes our concentration kind of isn't so great. We might have some imagery of other people, like and what they've shared with us, and I think that's important to be aware of. Self-doubt, maybe distressing thoughts that are going on for us. The last one's with relational. Sometimes we can find ourselves withdrawing from others, decreased interest in intimacy, isolation from friends or family. Sometimes minimizing others' concerns can come up as well. You're not realizing it, but you're like, oh, that's not so bad, right? Kind of thing, even though it might be something that's impactful to that person. Those are kind of components of the personal impacts of vicarious trauma on us when we're absorbing a lot of other people's information. So this is the examples of from a professional level. I always like to put this in there because it can impact us in our work life too. So we have this kind of home life and the family we support, and then there's several people who might have work or places, even volunteering areas where you're giving yourself in other areas. So we tend to see in our professional side, we might see decreased quality or quantity of work. We might have difficulty with attention and forgetfulness. Our morale might be really low, decreased interest. We might feel undervalued and underappreciated at work, disconnected. We might have a little bit of reduced compassion for our coworkers, detached or withdrawn, conflict, impatience. And then the last one, we might be calling out or arriving late to work, overworked, feeling exhausted, because you might be having stuff happening at home and then also having to go to work and handle. And I think now there's this added piece of work at home for a lot of people, because now you're trying to balance your family life and your work life in one place. And there's not a lot of information about the impact on our community in that way yet, but I think we're going to be hearing a little bit more about it. So there's some good news about this journey of being impacted by vicarious trauma. And I'm going to talk to you, vicarious resilience is actually the positive that we can get out of the process. And so I'm going to talk about resilience because I know everyone's heard that. I'm not sure if everyone's heard vicarious resilience. So resilience is when we adapt to adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or significant sources of stress. It means we bounce back from that difficult experience. Vicarious resilience involves the process of learning about overcoming adversity from the trauma survivor or the person we might support or our family member. And it results in a positive transformation or an empowerment through their empathy and interaction. So we actually kind of latch on to their growth and their journey. And so we can actually build resilience for ourselves when we're supporting other people. And I think that's a really wonderful gift that people can give us. But we have to be aware of what's happening to us with those other pieces, which is, these pieces on these other two slides, is when we start to feel these things, we have to be able to acknowledge them so that we can start to go, oh, what can we learn from this process and how can we move through it so that we have a positive transformation as well. And that's where the power resides in it. So the impact of vicarious resilience is we can get a greater perspective and appreciation of our own problems. We can be more optimistic, motivated, and re-energized. We can get an increased sense of hope and understanding and a belief in the possibility of recovery, which I think is that's probably my most powerful. I feel like that's one of the most powerful things in here is that sense of hope and that possibility of recovery and that it's there. And then the profound sense of commitment to and finding meaning from the work or the support you provide to that family member. And I think that, we need to be proud of ourselves for the work that we do and the help that we provide those in our families and those in our community. So there is this resilience piece that can come out of this very difficult process. So I'm going to stop there with my part, and I'm actually going to switch over and let Laura talk about the self-care piece.
Thank you, Bree. Okay, mask off. Okay, so first I just want to say that it's so nice to see the questions and comments coming up in the chat, the snippets that I can see. It's difficult to not be in the room with everyone, so that's really helpful. So while I was listening to Bree, she was talking about this idea of how we can show up for another person and how we can be empathic. And also the idea about putting on our own oxygen mask first. So I think the two main ways that we do that are with self-care, and we'll talk quite a bit about that, and then also with boundaries. So first starting with self-care, so hopefully you can see, so a definition up is from the WHO actually. So self-care is what people do for themselves to both establish and maintain health and to prevent and deal with illness. So we'll talk a little bit about what this looks like hourly, daily, and then a bigger self-care plan. Self-care is a broad concept encompassing hygiene, both general and personal, nutrition, so type and quality of food eaten, lifestyle, including sporting activities, leisure, environmental factors. I don't think we think about that a lot, and many of these, as the question came up before with homelessness, we don't have control always over our living conditions. Social habits and what we do relationally, and that certainly has changed with COVID. And then socioeconomic factors, including income level, cultural beliefs, and then self-medication. So it's important to not only have a sense of things that we do in the moment when we're experiencing distress, but then also what we can do bigger picture so that we can have a wellness plan in place. Okay, so now I will attempt to go to the next slide. Oh, amazing. Okay, so an example, so here at El Camino in our both youth and adult programs, we do a lot of what we call dialectical behavior therapy. And so these are skills that we can use in the moment to help improve the moment. It can be different ways that we soothe with the five senses, let's say, for example. So a couple of things that I like to do would be to have a hot cup of tea. So that's one way that you can help to sort of gain that equilibrium back with a temperature change. And then another one, which I use and I hear a lot from program members talking about, is petting my dog. So that's going to be both the sense of touch, but then also, of course, the smell. So I want you to just kind of take a moment and think about specifically what are some of the things that you do to improve the moment, so to make yourself feel better. And so I gave some examples of using the five senses or temperature, and also certainly reaching out and talking to another person, or maybe changing the setting that you're in, either getting alone time or connection. So with this, this next activity, so first, making a list of things that you're already doing that makes you feel better in the moment. And then next, and we'll give you time for this next, a list of things that you can do all the time that will support overall you feeling better. So this goes back to that definition, the broader definition of self-care. So it's going to be everything from caring for your own physical health, so things that we may not think about, and sometimes when we're caring for others that might go by the wayside, like keeping medical appointments or making those medical appointments, taking medications that are prescribed to us. And then, of course, not using any short-acting substances. Of course, I'm going to say that. And also, what are you doing for your nourishment and sleep plan? So take a moment and we'll see what people come up with. Oh, yes. Okay. So I'm glad I'm in the same room with Bree, even though we're far away. She said, please put it in the chat so that we can connect a little bit. Okay. Can you read them?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, there's so many. Okay, great. So this is so nice that we can kind of share and learn from each other.
So this is Bree. I'm going to share a few. These are so great. I super align with the hot cocoa with whipped cream because I'm definitely a chocolate fan. Looks like taking walks, tending garden. I'm just doing a few walks, petting my dog.
So I just want to pause for 1 second. So that's really important, the taking walks and tending in the garden. So it's also just by, I talked about changing the setting, but also by going outside, you can either increase or decrease your stimulation, and the fresh air can be really nice, and maybe some solitude. Gardening and those sorts of things, really powerful for some people, not everyone. So this is just about figuring out what's actually helpful for you. So don't feel badly if you don't garden.
I think some other things that came up, I love this one, being open and talking it out with a friend.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes in the moment, or just having regular kind of times that you have with friends. I'm hearing a lot more about people Zooming in their friend groups and that support. Reading a book, taking a nap, singing, I love that one.
Yeah.
Breathing deeply, gratitude journals. I think those are really, really powerful.
Mm-hmm.
I also love art. I do paint by number, so the drawing and painting. These are just wonderful things. Connecting with friends, things to get out of the house and away sometimes from the immediate stress. Prayer, I definitely think for, spiritually reaching into your spiritual self. Puzzles have been a big one. So these are really, really great.
Yeah, and so puzzles, right, so that's to the person that put that, so thank you, because that's a little bit different than other ideas that have come up. So that's around when we engage ourselves cognitively, or what we call our rational mind, and then also having some task completion, right, can help us feel a little bit more in control, even if something's small. Did someone say paint by numbers?
I said paint by numbers.
Yeah.
Someone said painting.
Nice. Okay. Yeah, and that's also a nice visual, soothing.
I love this one too. Research my ancestors so you feel connected. That's amazing. Very powerful.
Yeah. And that's
Oh.
a good shelter in place activity.
I like the baking. You
Yeah.
can come bake at my house if you'd like.
Yeah, nice.
Drinking a cup of tea.
Okay.
Deep conditioning my hair.
Okay.
I totally agree. That can be a wonderful feeling.
Yeah, so that's hygiene.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I have another one, watching YouTube videos of cats and dogs. I think that's lovely. There are some amazing
Oh, I'm glad that came out.
videos.
That's super popular. Yeah.
Yeah. Trying to see. Sorry, I know I'm just getting glimpses. Amazing. Thank you guys for sharing. There was a lot of good stuff there.
And just going back to the, there was a deep conditioning your hair, so that's on the surface, right? It's self-care and pampering, but then again, it's going to be temperature, and then the tactile, and then also, of course, scent, right? So if you have some body products that you like the way they smell, that's a really great thing. So kind of, we'll move on to the next bit, which is identifying a plan about how you can put some of these things into place. So it may be now that we've heard some other suggestions that people have, or maybe some things that you put on your list that you used to do or would want to do but aren't doing right now. So this is a time to really think about what materials do you need, or what situation do you need to make this happen. Hello, Bree.
Sorry.
No, it's all good. So kind of having some action steps, and then visualizing that and figuring out what problems may come up, who you might need to talk to in order to overcome different issues that are going to happen, and then come up with a couple of things that you're going to put into place. So sort of making a commitment to yourself. So we'll pause for a couple minutes and let you work on that. So if I could just ask if any of you have come up with a plan or some action steps, if you're willing to share those, if you could put those in the chat, that would be great. And sometimes in order to transform something that we use maybe at home to the on-the-go setting. So if you're noticing that some of your in-the-moment coping has to do with scent, then you can kind of make a to-go kit. Or if it's, let's say, with touch, then maybe you have something soft that you're wearing. Like I know, Bev, you have the scarf on, so that's a nice example of how you can kind of carry some in-the-moment coping with you. Or it may be, having a tart candy, making sure that you have that in your bag, something like that. So kind of taking a look at what sorts of things are soothing for you for your self-care. Chat update.
We have a couple.
Okay, thank you.
We have a couple. We have, let's see, divvy up the household chores so that I can make time that I need for myself. I think that's a really, really important one. Fuzzy socks on my feet. Absolutely. Laura talked a little bit about that tactile component, and the hot cocoa, which I will forever support with the whipped cream. Stretching, deep breathing. Just some amazing, these are some really, really good, like in the moment things you can do. This is great.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and move on. And again, I just want to thank you for being brave enough to chat some of your work so that we can share and learn from that. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about boundaries. So a lot of what Bree was talking about was this skill that many people have to be able to connect with another person, to take that time to try to walk in another's shoes and really listening with our ears and listening with our heart. And so that's about opening our boundaries. And so the question is, how do we do that, but still hold our own boundaries? So I want you to kind of think about this idea of, we were talking about self-care and nurturing, and that's where we're establishing a boundary around ourselves. And it's with that boundary that enables us to be connected without being overly connected or feeling drained when we are able to support another person. So if anyone has some thoughts about when you think about how your own boundaries interplay into possibly vicarious trauma. So what happens around your boundaries when you have those interactions, and how is that impacting you? And if you are willing to share some chat, we would love to hear that.
Mm-hmm. Why don't I?
Yeah, go ahead,
Why don't I
Bruce.
switch with you?
Yeah.
Laura and I are going to switch up a little bit. We're towards the end of the training, but I want to make sure that we hit on this boundary piece. So I think someone made a really good comment around it's okay to say no sometimes, or it's okay to say, yeah, could we do that tomorrow? That right now might not work for me. And it's kind of when I said, like, boundaries aren't about not supporting or helping the people that we love or our family members, but again, it is about remembering to choosing to put that oxygen mask on yourself first, and then making that next step so that you can be really present. And I think it is really hard. I think someone in the comments brought up, feeling guilty about that sometimes. And I think that's true. I think that's real, is then we feel guilty about not being present, because a lot of times it becomes our identity and who we are, that we're the person who is the support person, and we want to be there, and we really value that about who we are. And I think it's so important to be aware of that, and that's a wonderful part of ourselves. And also, how do we balance? Because it can be really hard. I actually don't love the word no. I think I actually am not good at saying it, so I've had to figure out other ways to say, like, ooh, could I do that in an hour or 2 hours? Or could I talk to you tomorrow morning about this and be really present for you? So I think that's really, really, really helpful. And so I just think that's really, really amazing. So I'm getting a lot of comments that are great. Someone that's validating, saying, I love you, and I'm going to step away because I want to be really present with you and be able to support you. I think those are really healthy. But it's important for us to find our own ways to do it, because I would love to give you a list of, like, all the ways you could do this. And the reality is we all have to find our own journey in that, and how to set boundaries and figure out what works for us.
And one comment to that point, Bree, I think that we often think of boundaries as what we say to another person. So, like, if I say it the right way, then another person's going to respect my boundary. And I just want to put out there that we can very powerfully set boundaries with what we do or what we don't do. And then for boundaries in general, I like to think about different types of boundaries. So we certainly have time boundaries, which Bree was speaking to, financial boundaries, emotional boundaries, sexual boundaries, intellectual boundaries. And they're going to be different in different relationships and in different situations. So kind of figuring out kind of where we end and where we're able to engage with another person around those different spaces.
And I also want to be like, there's also boundaries for us around other things. Like I know people, like I have friends who've set boundaries around their social media and have just made decisions to not have that kind of input because it's hard for them that day. So there's other ways that we can do things to protect ourselves that aren't just always about our relationship with others, but things we can in that self-care and wellness, we can create those boundaries with things like social media, if that's helpful for you. Again, you have to define what's going to be helpful for you. Okay. I'm going to move on. Thank you so much. You guys had a lot of great comments. I've been reading them as I've been going through. So this is our last slide, and then we'll open it up for questions. So clients, patients, family members will not stop needing help and support. Disasters will continue to rise. Children will get sick. Trauma will occur. Helping professionals and family members need to continue to explore ways to remain healthy while doing this deeply challenging and rewarding work. So this can be challenging and yet super rewarding. And so I think it's just so important to be aware that we're going to still, things are going to continue to happen. And we happen to be in a pandemic, which is just so different than anything than I've experienced in my lifetime. And so I feel like I've had to pivot in a lot of ways, and it's been impactful. But I am continuing to explore different ways for myself to remain healthy and still be able to care for the people around me, whether it's in my work life or my family life. So I just like this quote. I think it has a reality to it, but also a kindness and grace that we can give ourselves as people who are supporting others. So that is the end of our formal presentation.
All right, thank you so much. That was great. So I do have questions that was sent to us, and I think we do have some questions in the chat as well. Why don't I go over the ones that were sent to us by the participants, and then I can browse through the ones in the chat box, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, just give me 1 second. Okay. There's a question about how to protect family assets and health while a family member is going through an episode.
How to protect family assets
and health.
Yeah, and health. You know, I think we kind of come back to the boundaries piece around that. I don't really want to, I'm not sure I can speak to the family assets portion. That's not necessarily in my scope. And with health, I'm curious if you're about your health or as a support person, or if it's the health of your family member. I think for our health, again, this vicarious trauma piece is just so impactful on that, and that we need to be really aware of taking care of ourselves. And it can be really difficult when we spend a lot of time supporting someone else, and it can be overwhelming when someone has come out of a recovery and they're having a really hard time. And so we can still be loving and caring and supportive and provide opportunity, and yet also make sure that we're setting good, healthy boundaries for ourselves and feeling safe. So I think it's important to do what is it called, an internal list for yourself of what you need to stay healthy so that you can be as present as you can. Again, figure out how to put your oxygen mask on, and what does that look like for you? We've given you all these examples, but for every person, even as you saw, some people like to garden, some people like hot cocoa, some people like to take a walk, some people like to take deep breaths. It's important to pull those things that you know work for you, and to explore those as much as possible.
Great, thanks. Thanks for answering that.
Yeah.
Another question is, what about intergenerational trauma? How do we help someone that may be suffering from the effects but cannot see it or believe it themselves?
Intergenerational trauma is really challenging, and we see it a lot. Actually, we see intergenerational trauma come up more, I think, than more than we often realize. And I think we have to step back a little bit and kind of understand that when people aren't recognizing it in their world, it's because they're trying to keep themselves safe and they're trying to protect themselves. And our human nature is to create kind of a defense mechanism around it. And what I find is that when people are ready to be able to identify it for themselves, that they're able to do that on their own. It's not necessarily up to me or someone else to push them into it. It's for them to be able to go through their own journey to get to that place. And some people are able to go there and recognize it, and some people aren't ready, and we don't always know what that journey is like for everyone. So again, I kind of fall back to that. It's really important to walk beside someone as they're going through their journey, and be mindful of it.
And one more thing on that, I think it's in our programs we look at the stages of change, and I think that it can be very challenging when family members are either seeing a situation quite differently, or are at a different level of awareness, or how they're identifying what an issue is. So I think that it's important, so sort of for the person who is framing this question, that if you're not having that shared experience and validation from another person in the family, that you do have someone who you can talk to and who can resonate and validate your experience. So I think NAMI is a fantastic resource for that.
Thanks. Okay, another question is about how to support a child with frustration over the pandemic, and limits have been imposed.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I feel like we get this question a lot because the pandemic is so foreign for all of us, and we're trying to navigate this new landscape without really understanding all the rules. Or we get rules and then we get new rules. I don't know. That's how I felt, is like, oh, there's new rules. And then how the impacts of our young people, teens, et cetera. I think one of the pieces that I've heard has been most effective is just being honest and transparent, and as clear as possible. I also think that each family unit has different values and support around it. And so I think it's important for you as a family, to be really clear about where your stance is on how you're going, what kind of protections you want with your own family. And then I think, again, just being honest about what's going on in the world and the community, and that even though it's unknown, that you as the parent or the support person are going to keep that young person safe. That's your role, and you're going to do the best that you can by them. And I think that tends to be really helpful, because the reality is things could change again tomorrow or next week, and it's unknown.
Can you read the question one more time?
Could you read the question one more time, Rovina? I think Laura wants to add a piece.
Yeah, how to support a child with frustration over the pandemic and limits are imposed.
Yeah, so certainly it's going to depend on the age of the child, what they can do. But what I've seen personally is that, weeks have turned to months, that with different suggestions and brainstorming, that there are things that the kids can do that maybe they weren't doing before. So, teenagers literally having a socially distanced picnic at a park, or, taking yoga mats and setting them far apart and, trading off leading poses, things that would not have happened before. So, you can still take a bike ride. So, different things, and really encouraging the kids to do these things, or, there are families that have figured out how to put a movie up in the backyard and invite a few kids, so it's been quite amazing. And I marvel just in my neighborhood seeing, adolescents and, high school kids on walks, playing their music, and this, so just kind of having a little bit of autonomy and independence. And then those examples I gave around, the kids, they really need that connection. And what can that look like? And it's not, realistic just to stay in the house, end. Because, here we are.
Yeah.
So such a good, question.
Good question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. I have one more here. How does one safely give space to grieve for a lost loved one in this time of overwhelming emotional stimulations?
I'm sorry, could you read it one more time? It was a lot.
Yeah. How does one safely give space to grieve for a lost loved one in this time of overwhelming emotional stimulations?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it can be so hard to separate. I feel like there's grief everywhere. There's grief around our loss of freedom a little bit. I think there's grief around the fact that we're not existing the way that we have for so many years, and then to lose someone that you care about is so challenging. And I think with giving space, and I'm going to go back to this again, it's allowing someone to go on their own journey through that process and offering support and kindness and empathy in the moment, and being available when, as appropriate, when someone's requesting you be available. I think it can be hard when there's loss and then people might all be at home together. And how do you create space so that people have their own time and space to grieve? Because some of the things that we used to do, we can't do anymore. I mean, one of my things that I know I do is I go to the gym. That's a place where I do a lot of counting in my head, and it's very calming for me, and it's allowed me to go through some really tough times. And then I didn't have the gym anymore. And that was really challenging. What do I do with myself now when challenging things happen in my world, or sadness? I feel like there's grief all around us right now. And so I think there's giving ourselves grace and just offering kind words, and just allowing, each person to go through their journey their own way, because everyone has a different journey they take. And you can even take a different journey based on different people. So the way you grieve for one person in your life may be different than the way you grieve. So as a family member, if you're watching someone go through grief for more than one person over a period of time, it might look really different each time. And I think that's important to be aware of. Do you have anything to add, Laura?
So it's a really good question, and certainly impacted by COVID. So just a couple things that come to mind. I think just that it's so thoughtful, this sort of question. So this is what's helpful. And by being able to have it in your awareness that your idea of space or connection may not be someone else's, and then when someone goes through a traumatic loss, what they need and when they need it may be very different than what you would think they need or what you would need. So a couple of things that come to mind is just having that discussion, or just reflecting what you see in the other person and sort of what you're observing, and then what you think that they would need from that, and then to check that out. And then the other thing, which can be especially challenging, is normal rituals of gathering, and possibly through people's spirituality, or community, and also physical spaces can't happen in the same way. And, so how do we make that look different for now, and then make a commitment to, those rituals that person would normally do or have, so that we make sure that does happen when we open back up, so that we don't just have all of this grief that's passed without these rituals that help us work through the grief. And so I think naming that is important. But one thing that I have seen happen in my community is people being able to be a part of both happy celebrations, and then also loss and funerals with Zoom that would normally not be able to engage. So there is some of that, sort of a broader space of people being able to be brought in, which is really nice too.
Yeah. Thanks for answering. I have one last question. Can teens experience vicarious trauma through their friends' trauma?
Yes. Yes, that's vicarious trauma. Absolutely. We definitely find that at that age, they like to share as well, which is good. But yeah, absolutely. Just like anyone else, our teens, even though their brains are still developing, they have the capacity for empathy. And when we have that capacity, it can relate to trauma and the impact of trauma, because our brains are wired a certain way. And so yeah, I have nothing else to say other than absolutely. they can. And we need to be aware of that, because we might see that a young person is starting to change in their behavior, or some of those core things that I brought up that maybe they might not recognize in themselves. But as a parent, I always think a good question to a teen is there something that's making you sad or worried about your friends or the people around you? And can you tell me about it? And open up the conversation. Because I think it's important. It's a good question to ask, and sometimes we don't think to ask. We ask, what's wrong with you? And sometimes the question needs to be like, is there something else that you're worried about or that you're concerned about? Is it a friend? Is it a family member? What's going on for you?
And to reflect back to them what you're noticing, any differences, or how you see them, and then to be very, very deliberate to just listen, and to not try to reassure or problem solve too quickly, but to just let them, once they express themselves, to just be able to hold that for a little bit, and then ask them what it is that they need. So they may need to problem solve, or to just vent, or to know that it won't freak us out for them to be open with us. And they may truly be worried about someone, and we may need to help them take action if there's a safety issue.
That's very good information. So those are the questions that we had. I would like to thank you, Brianne and Laura, for this amazing presentation. I think this was so informative and right in time of, when all of us are experiencing all these different emotions because of COVID and now the winter approaching. So this was very, very helpful. I really, really appreciate you coming in tonight and spending so much time in sharing your information with us. So thank you once again from NAMI Santa Clara County, and I hope to see you in person at some point of time, and invite you again for a general meeting again. So thank you.
Thank you so much. We really enjoyed being a part of this, and the questions and people's sharing and being vulnerable. I just want to say I really appreciate it. It makes the presentations more powerful when people are engaged, and I just saw a lot of engagement from everyone on here. So I just really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. The activities were a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Have a good night.
Bye-bye.
Good night.